Good morning. Sorry, we're having a few technical difficulties today. Cheryl's computer doesn't want to talk to StreamYard. So I'm going to get started here, and I want to make sure you didn't think we weren't getting on today. We are. We're just experiencing a little bit of technical difficulty and hope that we'll be able to do this fully very quickly. So welcome again. I'm Linda Easthurst from Reclaim Your Life Coaching. We've been doing the Thriving in Chaos set this week because it's been such a big issue for so many people. And we wanted to just share how there's help available. There are ways available. There's techniques and tools that you can learn. There are things that you can do for yourself to really get the ability to thrive. So yesterday we shared some of how when we have our history of stress, the things that have happened to us over the years, it all gets stored in our biofield, in that circle of energy that is part of us, that surrounds us, between what makes us us and not us. And in that, there's all kinds of stuck pieces of energy called standing waves. And those are the stresses and memories and experiences and issues and happy moments and all kinds of things that have happened to us that have not fully integrated or resolved or been dealt with in an appropriate way. And so they're just sitting there in our biofield waiting for something to happen to them. And these things really affect our ability to function as healthy individuals. And they affect the results that we get in life. And fortunately, we can do something about that with using energy medicine and coaching combined. The combination allows us to achieve fast, functional, healthy ways of dealing with and moving past some of those past stresses and past difficulties. I shared some information on how we store the past and present information and our patterns of behavior and the past traumas in our body, and how we can govern our lives and how these govern our lives in various negative ways. But we can refresh that programming. We can update the programming. We can free ourselves from these old dysfunctional ways so that we can move more gracefully and more elegantly into a better version of ourselves. If you missed that segment, please go back and watch it. You'll want to see it. It's on our page here. There'll be reruns on the page available for you if you need them. There, I think we have Cheryl in. So welcome. Sorry, I just did the intro for us.
That's great. I was having technical difficulties, as they call it.
Yes. Anyway, we're just going to carry on here.
Okay.
So today we want to go deeper into how the programming gets messed up. And there are actually 4 primary ways that that happens. 3 of them we're going to talk about today. One of them we're going to leave for later. These 4 different things degrade our programming, and that's when we start to fall apart. That's when things don't work as well. The 4th one requires a much deeper look, and so we're going to save that for our coaching program because you need to kind of be a little bit prepared for some of that stuff. So it's a much deeper one. But the 3 aspects today we're going to touch on are related to things that you're probably already aware of, and we just want to help you see what we can do with them and a way to change it. You came into this world with some pre-installed software, and that carries the trauma of your family line. And that's the 4th one we're going to deal with. So we're going to leave that to the side for now. Just as a little tiny example, your depression, for instance, may not have started with you. It might have come in with you. So that's another day's topic, and we'll get back to how that trauma affects you. But right now we're going to look at the more obvious ones. We're going to look at how trauma affects us, how installed malware and virus affect us, and what we can do about that.
Okay, so I brought along with me a little prop today. And this is my water jug. And stress is a lot like water in a glass. So the water part here is representative of stress. And like Linda said, we're born with stress in our system that we've inherited from our parents and, even going through the birth process and stuff like that. And every time we get stress, water goes into the jug, and the space above the water is representative of your ability to adapt to what life throws at you. So the more stress that we accumulate in our system, the less adaptation we have up here. And stress comes in many forms. It can come through eating foods that don't agree with you. It could come through if you're walking down the street and a truck drives by and you're breathing in the diesel fumes from the truck. That's a form of stress. Stress is also fighting with your husband or your kids. So anything that is stressful to the system accumulates, and it doesn't have to be huge things. It can be little tiny things just piled up on top of one another. So unless you can find a way of dumping water out of the system, you're going to suffer some form of blowout eventually over time. And so, for instance, when my cup got too full, I actually had a heart attack in 2005. The other thing that it'll do is, like in my own life, years of unrelenting stress from being hypervigilant all the time produced high levels of circulating cortisol in my system. And when you have that highest level of cortisol, it'll actually have a corrosive effect on the brain. And this affected my brain and my memory quite badly. When I was younger, I used to have a photographic memory. I could read a book and I knew who the author was. I knew the year it was published. I knew who published it. If I needed a quote somewhere from the book, I knew exactly where to look in the book and even on what part of the page to look for. I don't know how I did it. It was just like a snapshot. I knew all that stuff. However, when I started doing this type of work, there's a correction that we do where you have to find 2 points on the body. And I could find the first point, and then when I went to find the second point, I would forget what the first point was, just in a matter of moments. So I had to start writing down the first point before I found the second one because my memory was so impaired by all the stress I'd been under for all those years. Some memory loss is protective. So we suppress memories of a disturbing kind in order to be able to function. There were many times when my kids will recount some story from their childhood. So the other day, my daughter said, "Do you remember the time that I broke my arm?" And I'm like, "You broke your arm?" She says, "Yeah, I broke my arm and I had a red cast and I went to school and I'm like, "No, I don't remember that. Sorry." But that was during a very stressful time of my life when that happened. Now, thankfully, her arm is fine now, but I can't remember that. The kids will constantly, we have the family get together and they'll recount stories, and I have no memory of some of the stuff that they're talking about. So another thing that people will do when they're really stressed is they'll dissociate. So little children, if they go through a terrible experience. So some people who experience childhood sexual assault will dissociate from themselves, and they'll just block that memory out through the dissociation. And that is a way that the body uses to protect itself so that you can survive through the event. But not all dissociation is terrible. We dissociate when we daydream, for instance. That's a healthy type of dissociation. Or when you become lost in a story that you're reading, or when you meditate. These are all different ways that we dissociate on a regular basis. However, when it crosses a line into obsessive behaviors, depression, PTSD, mental health disorders, because there's just too much stress in the system, we have to find a way to bring about healing without reliving the trauma and reinforcing the negative patterns that got you there. And that's where energy medicine really shines. Like, I've worked with women who've experienced some really terrible stuff, and they've been through counseling and they've done all the therapies. And in some ways, some of those counseling sessions and therapies actually reinforced the trauma and made it worse for them. But through energy medicine, you don't have to retell your story, and you don't have to upset yourself by going back and trying to remember everything. We're able to bring you back into a place of balance and emotional self-regulation. And it's as easy as just taking this jug and pouring water out of it.
Awesome. Thank you, Cheryl. Trauma is such a big one for so many people, and it's one of the primary causes of why our system gets unregulated and why our programming degrades. Because if you disassociate too much, you just have memory lapses. You can't go back and find the file about that. Or it changes the way you look at the world, and it affects your programming significantly, and you live your next experience based on that. And those memories and all of that stuff is such a huge part of it. However, there are other ways. And one of those is what I call installed malware. If you're familiar with computers and things, you know that you get malware and viruses and Trojan horses and other things. Well, malware is the things where somebody has installed something onto your computer and then they use it for their benefit and manipulate it and take information from you and use your computer to do other things, to send out mail that you don't even know is going out, all that kind of stuff where someone else is manipulating and using your resources for their benefit. So that's what malware means. Well, that happens in our energetic system, in our emotional system as well. That installed malware disturbs your energy system, but it's through a program that it was installed in us, usually as a child. When you're born, you have some basic pre-installed software with how to deal with setbacks and how to respond to challenges and so on. But you don't have a really well-formed ethical pattern of how to determine right from wrong, good for bad, all those things that we learn from the people around us. About 80% of our moral and ethical responses and our personality are formed by those figures of authority that are around us. Mm-hmm. Our parents, our older siblings, our teachers, our elders in a faith community, our kids club leaders like your Girl Guides, etc. Our beliefs about how society works, about how we should behave, about what we should do, that's all learned behavior. It's how we're socialized. Those learned behaviors are often malware. And that is because the dysfunctional patterns that one of those authorities had are passed on to us. And that dysfunctional pattern that they experience becomes our dysfunctional pattern. And it allows us to be manipulated and used for others' benefit. Girls, for instance, are taught generally to be people pleasers. Many are taught to reject their own basic gut instinct and give hugs and kisses to adults that they don't want to be near. We're taught it's okay for men to treat women with disrespect. And if we are harmed by that, it's our fault. And what we wore or what we said or where we were is the problem. That we have no autonomy and everyone else's needs come first. Everyone else's wants come first. Everyone else decides what we get to do. Men were taught to be fiercely independent and emotionless. When women have no autonomy and everyone else's needs come first, and men are taught to be independent and emotionless, that sounds like a recipe for abusive households. And those are all programs that are installed in us, malware programs that are installed in us through our upbringing. And that installed malware can be removed. We see it in the way that women are treated sexually. We see it in the workplace. We see it in homes for the most part. Think about the tapes that run in your head where you hear a parent's voice telling you something negative, like, oh, you'll never amount to anything, or, oh, you're just a girl. Or maybe you hear it in your partner's voice when you've both worked all day, but now supper needs to get done, homework needs to get done, housework is piling up. And the unspoken, and sometimes even spoken messages, it's your job and your partner is really good. Maybe they'll help a little bit. How often do you find yourself asking your partner to help with the dishes or the laundry and then thanking them for doing it as if they did you a favor? They are living in the same space. They're enjoying the same benefits of food on the table. They're enjoying a clean house. They're enjoying clean laundry. So why is it all your responsibility? Why should you have to feel grateful that they're willing to help out a little bit? That mindset is installed programming, and it can be changed. Mm-hmm. Many of you are either at the end of the baby boomers or raised by baby boomers who believed in a very regimented schedule and feedings for babies and thought it was fine to let a baby cry themselves to sleep. In fact, they were taught that it was good to let a baby cry themselves to sleep. And the baby cried themselves to sleep with their needs unmet. Who told kids it wasn't okay to cry or to talk about your feelings? You had to put on a good face and behave no matter what was going on the inside. The kids who grew up in that kind of parenting feel unworthy. Their needs didn't matter. They didn't deserve better. They learned to hide their feelings, to carry on no matter what was going on in life. It's what I was raised in, and it's taken a lot of energy work to break that. And if you heard some of my story yesterday, you'll see that. Those patterns were there.
Yeah.
That is installed malware that needed to be dealt with. But thankfully for me, it's never too late to change.
So some of the viruses that get installed are things that are caught and not taught. And every generation has their own areas of what I call boundary busting. If you look at the problems that exist between people in relationship, usually what's happening is proper boundaries are not being maintained. In other words, it's okay for this person to treat the other person with disrespect because of some arbitrary rule that has been set up in that cultural conditioning that people have been taught. So like Linda said, baby boomers, I can remember this, like my grandmother telling me when I had my first baby, and she was crying, she says, "Oh, don't pick her up because you'll spoil her." And I'm like, how do you spoil a baby? Now, thankfully, I didn't listen to it, but Dr. Spock and all those, and even some of the more modern iterations of that, some people have been exposed. I remember when I was having my kids, so I was in midwifery circles, and because I was a doula, so I was in those circles, and one of the big scandals of the time was something called ESO parenting, and it was a very regimented form of parenting that the children had to fit in these nice tidy little slots, and the parents ruled the house with a rod of iron, and it was not very responsive to the needs of the children or even the individual personalities of the children. It was like children had to fall within these very strict guidelines. And I think one well-known iteration of that would be that homeschooling family that was on TV. Jeepers, I can't think of their name now. Christian family down in the States. The father used to be a U.S. representative. You probably know who I'm talking about. Memory issues, right? Anyways, they were a TV family, and they had a very regimented way of doing things. It wasn't cheaper by the dozen, but it was some huge family. And eventually that whole thing kind of fell apart because there were issues because of the way those kids were raised and how like there just wasn't room for maneuvering within that system. And part of that was because of the religious background that these people brought into their home life and the rules that they had been taught because they were affiliated with the Gothard Institute and all of their silly rules that they had created. So learning to separate yourself from these installed programs and being able to think clearly and create good ethical boundaries of respect and appreciation and consideration, and being able to identify when boundaries are being broken and knowing what to do with it is one of the things that we are involved in with the coaching program that we're bringing in. And the beauty of it is that we can go in and remove some of that programming really quickly for you.
I want to give you a little example from my own life of how that all plays out. Some of you who listen to my Facebook Lives regularly know that I grew up in what I consider to be an emotional and verbally abusive home with an alcoholic, workaholic father. And what I come to realize now was an emotionally distant mother who was simply trying to function in a dysfunctional relationship. I'm not sure she would have called it that, and she did her best. And for the most part, my mother was wonderful, but not a lot of the emotional contact that one might have expected from a mother. Looking back, there's really no other way to call it than dysfunctional and emotionally abusive, primarily from my father, but it was there. It's a program that replicates itself and it takes over, and that's why we call it a virus as opposed to a malware. Some of it's just a program that runs, and other of it's something that gets into your system and starts to replicate and starts to show up in places where it wasn't started. And so this kind of a virus gets passed from family member to family member through the interaction in the family and in workplace to workplace and in community to community interactions. For a number of years, my father worked away from home on camp jobs, and he'd be gone for a couple of weeks, and then he'd be home for a week or two. And we would all hold our breath and hope for the best until he went back to work. We would walk around on eggshells, trying not to trigger his anger and not become the brunt of another tirade. It was definitely best to not be seen or heard, but to show up at meals and stay out of the way the rest of the time. I spent a lot of time in my room when he was home, or I spent it on the ski hill where I didn't have to think about him. I learned that speaking up or having my own ideas was not conducive to peace. So I learned not to talk or share anything from a very early age. I learned that bringing home straight A's meant I didn't get yelled at or punished. I learned that having no emotions was the easiest way to stay out of trouble. And I internalized that really, really well. To the point where when we got married, and my husband is an absolute wonder, you'll see in the story why I say that. When we got married, we would have discussions about emotions. And he'd ask me, well, what did I like and what would make me happy? And it was like a foreign language to me. I didn't have words for those things. For many years, if something happened, my sweet husband would ask me how I felt about it. I had no clue. I'd ask him what emotion I should have towards that or around that. And over the years, he taught me the language of emotions and feeling that I had suppressed for so many years. It was the energy work of natural bioenergetics that allowed me to clean out all those viruses and find that half of me that had never been used. Fortunately, I had done enough spiritual work and counseling and working with a coach that by the time I was married, I had removed enough of the patterns that I was able to choose someone who was not like my father. But that virus had been planted, and it was only the energy work that really began to remove the patterns, the workaholism, the need to please, and the need to succeed. And just a comment in there that if you don't do the work, both the counseling, the coaching, the energy work, probably most importantly, the energy work, you will be drawn back to the same pattern that caused the problems, because that's what's familiar. That's what you know. That's what feels safe, even though cognitively you know it is not safe. But it has that emotional pull because that's what's in your electric field and that's what it attaches to. So really important to get that work done for younger people. And I know this is going to sound really stupid. And looking back on it, I can't believe how ridiculous it was. But this virus pattern was so ingrained. And this is just an example of how insidious it gets. Randy and I were working on master's degrees in linguistics, doing summer school classes. And in the second summer, I had to take a phonology class. Now, it doesn't matter if you know what phonology is. It's a particular part of linguistics that can be very technical and difficult. It was an extremely tough class. The professor was extremely tough, extremely smart, but very tough. He made us really work and do the analysis to perfection, working on a tonal language. Now, the problem is I'm dyslexic. And doing a tonal language when you're dyslexic is nearly impossible. I worked like a dog. I put in way too many hours for one course, and I ended up with a B+ in that class. Now, you'd think I might have been happy that I passed it. No, I was utterly destroyed. I was ready to quit school. I admitted I was a complete failure and linguistics was way too hard for me and I was never going to succeed at it. I was depressed for days. I literally didn't leave my room for the weekend. What little bit of worth I had earned over the years through a wonderful husband who we'd been married about 2 or 3 years at that point, was destroyed by that one grade because I had learned so well that the only way to have love and acceptance is to have straight A's. And I absolutely lost it. Randy managed to talk me through it and we stayed in school, but I no longer loved linguistics. From then on, it was just hard work. I did recover my straight A's after that. It was the only class that ever threw me into that kind of a tizzy, but oh my goodness, it was clear that I needed some more work. The virus was not removed until many years later when I learned the energy medicine to address it. And any pattern that is not resolved will repeat itself in another way until you deal with that disharmony. There is simply no other way to deal with it.
Yeah. Viruses disable our ability to emotionally self-regulate. So what does that mean? Well, emotional self-regulation is the ability to calm yourself down when you're upset and cheer yourself up when you're feeling down. So someone who has good emotional self-regulation has the ability to keep their emotions in check and not let their emotions run them. So, you know, you have to kind of be aware of your emotions, first of all. But when you have poor self-regulation, and we've seen this in little kids who haven't been trained properly, like their parents don't know how to respond to their stressors, you'll see these little kids throw these enormous temper tantrums when they're not allowed to have a toy or some food that they wanted. They throw themselves on the ground and they just wail inconsolably. And maybe I used to hold my breath until I passed out. My mother's doctor told her, the pediatrician told her to throw a glass of water in my face when I did that. It brought me out of my swoon, and needless to say, I didn't do it too often so I learned emotional self-regulation to not have a temper tantrum that hard. But when that takes over, you lose the ability to choose the response that gives you the most benefit. So one of the tasks of a parent is to teach self-regulation to children. So many adults who are otherwise competent human beings can, you know, sort of like what's Linda's situation there, when she got that B+, it just threw her. It threw her back into the feelings that she had when she was a kid, and she had to bring home straight A's. So you can be a competent individual, and yet if you get into a certain situation that has a certain trigger for you, you'll react like you're a kid that doesn't know how to handle life, and you'll just fall to pieces. And that's because when we receive a wound in ourselves, in our spirits and in our hearts, we stay stuck at the age at which we've been wounded. So the good news is that you can accelerate your healing by dropping that stress out of your system through energy medicine.
So let's just quickly review kind of what we've done already today, because I realize it's a pretty packed information here. Where does this programming come from? Most of it shows up at the gut level responses and instincts rather than what we're thinking. It's the parents' voice, it's the teachers, the authority figures, the cultural leaders. And we believe them because we don't realize that they're projecting their crap onto us. And we grow up in this thinking it's normal. And as a child, your emotional system is designed for you to learn from those around you, to pick up other ways of dealing with life and their beliefs and their values. And so these programs just slide in insidiously, whether it's a malware that allows you to be manipulated or whether it's a virus that replicates itself into the way you do life. Mm-hmm. These are the things that create this dysregulation and the things that then make us dysfunctional as adults and prevent us from doing what we want to do and being who we want to be.
Just to give you an example, so I lived most of my adult life with a certain set of beliefs that I was taught through my faith community, and which was kind of I can't honestly say that it was emphasized in my parents' home, because they function more or less like partners together. But this belief that women are subordinate to men, and that the home life centers around serving that husband and making sure that he's fine, and the children and the mother are there to just kind of prop him up and make his plans and his life happy. That was deeply ingrained in me, and it also affected my relationship with God. I had a dysfunctional relationship with God himself as a basis because of things that had been installed in me in the form of teachings. So when my whole life blew up over a weekend, like within 5 weeks, I went from being a homeschooling mother, a wife, and a member of a faith community. And in 5 weeks, my kids were in school, my marriage blew up, and I was excommunicated from my church, right? I was like, holy crap, I have to start over. And so I took that time of disarray, even though I was a complete mess from all the boundary busting that had gone on for so long, over so many years. I took that time to go, okay, something I've been doing is not working. It didn't work. It's not right. And I started going back and re-examining what actually creates a healthy relationship, what has to go into it. And so I did a lot of reading, but I also had a lot of energy work being done on me to help me let go of some of those old patterns, because I knew that if I didn't change those patterns of behavior, I was going to recreate them again. Like it's really tough to change. You can do it, but it takes a lot of hard work to change those patterns. And the energy medicine really changed my belief system dramatically, so that when I remarried, I got a completely different type of husband, one who treats me with respect. And, you know, there hasn't been, I mean, we've had our little, we've never fought, but we do have disagreements on things. And both of us, we married at a time when we knew what sort of things were worth fighting about and which things you just let go. But the really cool thing is, I have never had a day where I ever doubted that he didn't have my back. And when I was going through the whole mess of divorce and everything, one of the things I found this fridge magnet that said, it's better to have loved and lost than to live with a psycho the rest of your life. And that's truly how I felt. Like, I realized at that point, it was easier for me to be alone and happy than to be in a marriage that was unhappy and that was literally killing me. And I was able to break all those patterns off and achieve an amount of healing that enabled me to choose a different type of partner that was not only good for me, but also good for my kids. And I'm just telling you, my life is so much better than it used to be. Best 10 years of my life have really. So one of the things that we want to emphasize to you is that there's always a way. There is a way out of these patterns, and there is hope that you can change things that are not working for you. And like, we'd love to be part of your process.
Yes, absolutely. And from our perspective, there's 3 simple steps that make up that way. First, you have to identify what your corrupt programming is. Most of us, it is so ingrained and so subconscious and so automatic that we don't even recognize it. I like to think of it as an iceberg. You all know what icebergs function as. There's a little bit above the water that you can see that's usually less than 1/3 of the iceberg that's visible above the water. And that part is your personality and what the world and friends see of you. But underneath is all of the rest, the huge part. That is all of the waves, the patterns, the memories, the undigested emotions that drive your life. And that is where coaching and talk therapy deal with, in that top third, the part that can be seen, the part that you present on the outside, the part that you are consciously aware of already. Remember, I did some counseling long before I had my breakdown over grades. And as much as I consciously knew it didn't matter, when it happened, it sure mattered, because I hadn't dealt with the underneath part, because nobody taught me how to at that point. So the top third, the part that you can see, that does need to be done. There are useful things there. There are helpful things there. That's where the coaching stuff comes in. And some of the mindset work that people do at a conscious level does try to dig down into the iceberg and break off bits and pieces. But doing it from that conscious perspective is very hard work and a very long journey.
Mm-hmm.
The real power is using energy medicine to filter out and unravel and clean the iceberg. You actually need an iceberg. It's how you were designed. You have depth and weight below the surface to keep you upright. The part that shows up here needs to be supported and held underwater. But the goal is for that to be clean and stable so that it serves you instead of derailing you.
Mm-hmm.
So that 1/3 conscious part is just the starting point.
There's another way that you can identify sabotaging and destructive patterns, and that's to watch what you do. So it's not what you say, and it's not what you tell people, it's what you actually do that shows where you're actually stuck. So for instance, a woman who says, I want to lose weight. She tells her friends this so that they'll hold her accountable, but when nobody's watching and she's feeling upset, she'll sit down with a bag of chips in front of the TV. Or, you know, she'll create excuses why she shouldn't get up and exercise today. So she may say out loud, this is what I want, but what's actually showing up in her behavior is a completely different priority. And the way you start to get inside and review and upgrade and clean the subconscious is through doing this deep work with energy patterns. There's a fella who's a scientist, cell biologist, his name is Bruce Lipton, and he has this saying that I think is brilliant. It's that your biography becomes your biology. So when you stuff your feelings and your stress, they're going to show up somewhere. When you're young and in your 20s and 30s, you can successfully stuff a lot of stuff under the surface into the bottom of the iceberg, and you can ignore it. And I think that's nature's way of allowing us to have the energy that we need to devote to raising our children and getting them launched. However, what a lot of people experience is when they reach their middle years and the kids don't need them as much and they're getting ready to leave the home, all of a sudden old traumas and issues will come up to the surface and demand to be dealt with. It's kind of like taking a bunch of, if your traumas and things were a beach ball, in your 20s and 30s, you've got the strength to hold down all these beach balls under the water. But when you hit middle age, all of a sudden they all start popping up and they shoot up out of the water and demand to be dealt with. And so that's where working with people like us, who not only do the coaching part and the counseling that you need, but also dismantle those underlying traumas for you, can get those beach balls under control. So if you want to know how a person is handling chaos, don't listen to what they say. Watch what they're actually doing. That'll give you a really good insight to what's actually happening there. So not all dissociating goes into the head. Instead, you become a whole person who can access all parts of your being without stress. You'll be able to bring all of yourself into alignment in a healthy way by offloading all these patterns that you don't need and that are holding you back. And this is a huge part of where the energy balancing approach in our coaching problem will really be of assistance to you. So the solution to having all that stress in your system is dump it out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl. It seems so simple, and it actually is. It never fails to amaze me with private clients who come in with this great long list of all the issues going on for them. And we do a couple of sessions and they come back and go, I don't even remember what used to happen. It's just gone. They can function. They're doing what they needed to do. The fear is gone. The stress is gone. It's amazing how much can be done. And in our coaching program, we teach you to do the basic techniques for yourself. We're not using this as a way to get you to do personal sessions for the rest of your life, because that's not the way we work. We want to teach you how to do it for yourself. Now, there may be issues where you do need somebody to help you through things. Absolutely. Some of the really deep issues, some assistance is really useful. And part of that is because you can't see your own blind spots. You can't see the things you don't know about yourself. So sometimes some input from somebody else is really useful. But for managing the day-to-day chaos, for learning to thrive on a day-to-day basis, for not being stressed out over the little things, the tools and techniques and processes that you will learn is really, really useful and going to allow you to live your life differently. So join us in the coaching program, but join us tomorrow, and we're going to talk about how you pivot from chaos to calm. That's all about resilience and things that you can do to build resilience, and how we can use our energy system to allow us to be flexible enough to not get knocked down by the chaos that's going on around us. So we hope we'll see you all tomorrow. If you missed the replay yesterday, it's up on the page. Today's replay will be up a little bit later today, and join us for tomorrow. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye now.